Well, welcome everyone to Ward. Welcome everyone who is joining us in another venue or online right now. We are glad that you're joining in with us. And everybody that's in here, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this. My name is John Haden. I'm the Director of Student Ministries here at Ward Church, and I'm honored to be here. I'm excited to be in this service this morning and to share with you a little bit about what God has placed on my heart. For the next few minutes, we're going to talk about the idea of really knowing who Jesus is. Really knowing who Jesus is. So I have a question for you. Have you ever made a snap judgment about someone as soon as you see them? You knew nothing about them. You hadn't even heard them speak, but in your mind, you'd already decided who they were. After the earlier service this morning, a gentleman came up to me right afterwards and said, "I made a snap judgment as soon as you walked up." I was like, "Oh, that's good to hear. It's good to hear." Luckily, we share the same hairstyle, so that it wasn't a bad thing, I guess. Anyways, we all do this. It's something that we all do. We have these snap judgments based on something that we see. Also, there's a thing that we do as well where we build a picture of who somebody is based on information that we've been given. We hear things about them. One of our friends describes one of their friends, and we feel like we know who they are, and then we meet them, and we're like, "Oh, you're not quite how I expected," because we're basing it on information and not on fact. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about a little bit this morning, about knowing who Jesus really is. One Saturday morning when I was in college, one of my friends named Brett called me up early and invited me to come play softball with them. They played softball that weekend in a tournament, and one of the gentlemen on the team got hurt in the first game, so they called and asked if I would fill in, and I said, "Yes, absolutely, I'll do it." So I showed up, and as I arrived, I realized that my friend Brett had been talking me up to everybody there. I played baseball in college, so he had been telling everybody that I played baseball in college, and apparently that I was going to be amazing at softball. And so everybody expected me to be great. You could probably tell where this story's going. So after I was there for a little bit, I was kind of warming up. I could hear some chatter from the other team in the dugout, and it made me feel pretty good. I have to admit, I felt pretty good about myself. I was like, I am going to be pretty good. This is easy. And so I got out there. The very first play I was involved in, it was a line drive hit to left field. I was playing shortstop. The left fielder goes back to get the ball, and he turns to throw it in. There's a guy rounding third base, and the coach, as I'm about to catch the ball, I hear the third base coach say, stay here. He'll probably throw you out." And I was like, "That's right, I would throw you out." And I gave him a hard look, and I just tossed the ball back to the pitcher. So the next play I'm involved in is a very similar situation. This time the coach decides to let him go. He just says, "Take off." And so I turn, and in my mind I'm thinking, this is going to be beautiful. And I throw it, and it sails over the backstop. It was one of the worst throws I've ever seen. My next 4 throws I made, another one went over the backstop. One went halfway up the backstop, so I was getting a little bit better, and then I threw one over the first base dugout. So needless to say, I have never been invited to play softball again until I came here to work at Ward. And it was really based on the same faulty information that I played baseball in college, so I'm going to be good at softball, which is obviously not true. And so we all do this. We all build this perception of who somebody is based on a snap judgment or on information that we receive. And this is just partial at best. The Marcus Buckingham Company recently conducted a study that said that you make a judgment about who somebody is within the first 10 seconds of meeting them. And then you spend the rest of the time you're with them trying to confirm or justify your assessment of this person. I have absolutely no problem believing this study because I've seen it to be true in my own life. I meet somebody, and before they say a word, I feel like I know them. I feel like I have judged who they are. I know who they are. And before you start to judge me for being a terrible person, I want you to be honest with yourself. You've done it too. When you meet somebody, before they ever say a word, they're walking towards you and you have an idea of who they are in your head. It's something that we all do, but it's not only with the people that we know, the people that are around us, but we also do this with God. We've also made snap judgments about who Jesus is based on faulty information that we've been given, based on something that somebody else has said, or based on one brief moment where he didn't do what we expected him to do. And the truth is that we're going to talk about today that there are two types of knowledge. There are two types of knowledge. There's intellectual knowledge. It's this knowledge that is based on something that you pick up by reading, by hearing. This is something that is merely by intellect. And then the second type of knowledge is experiential. It is a knowledge that doesn't come from what you read or what you hear. It comes from what you experience. You were there. Someone didn't tell you about it. You experienced it. The dangerous thing about intellectual knowledge of who somebody is that you don't really know them. And when you don't really know who somebody is, you can't actually have a relationship with them. At the very best, you can have a superficial relationship. You cannot have a real intimate relationship until you know who somebody is. I want to say that one more time. Until we have a knowledge of who someone really is, we cannot have a real intimate relationship with them. So the truth is, there are a lot of us in this room who don't really know who Jesus is. Some of us do. I understand that some of us really know who Jesus is, and we have an intimate relationship. And some of us think we do. Some of us believe that we know who Jesus is because we've been at church for a while. And this is why this is so important that we understand this, is because a right confession of who Jesus is essential to salvation. It is essential to this Christian life. Knowing who Jesus really is essential. It is something that we have to really, really know. And so right at the beginning of the New Testament, we have a book written by one of Jesus' disciples named Matthew. Matthew was writing to a Jewish audience with the idea of presenting Jesus to this audience as the long-awaited Messiah. And so this audience that he was writing to had their preconceived notions of who the Messiah would be. They heard all of this information, these prophecies of who the Messiah would be, and so they built in their minds an image of who the Messiah would become. And the thing is, when Jesus came on the scene, he was not what they expected. He didn't look the way they expected. He didn't act the way they expected. He didn't talk the way they expected. He didn't hang out with the people they expected. And so we come to this story about halfway through Matthew's book where Jesus is with his disciples, and Jesus is keenly aware of the fact that the cross is approaching, and he's also aware of the fact that he still has some things that he needs to make clear. And so what did Jesus have to make clear? He had to make clear who he is and what he's there to do. He had to make clear who he is and what he's there to do. He knows that is extremely important. Both of those are extremely important. So I want to look with you this morning at the story and unpack what this looks like for us. In Matthew 16, starting in verse 13, it says, "Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked the disciples, 'Who do people say that the Son of Man is?' And they said, 'Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets.' And he said to them, 'But who do you say that I am?'" Notice here there are two questions that Jesus asks. Two questions that Jesus asks. Who do people say the Son of Man is? Notice that he's speaking in third person. This is very impersonal. It's about somebody else. What are they saying about this person? What are they saying about him? And then he says, then he goes on to say, "But who do you say that I am? Notice he switches there to first person. He says, who do you say that I am? He makes it personal. He says it's not about what they say, it's about what you know. It's not about what they know, it's about what you know. He's driving the point home of these two types of knowledge. He's driving this idea of home of really knowing who he is. And it's interesting to look at the way people were describing Jesus. They said John the Baptist. John the Baptist, he was bold, he was unique, he was a bit of a controversial person. He was not scared to get in the faces of the religious people and call them out. He was not scared to get in their faces and call them a brood of vipers. He was one that was going around telling everybody that they should repent because the kingdom of heaven is here. And I can see the similarities between John the Baptist and Jesus. Because Jesus was also bold. Jesus was also controversial. Jesus was not scared to call out the religious leaders on their hypocrisy. He was the one who went into the temple and threw over tables, and he made a whip out of cords and began to chase people out of the temple. He was bold. He was controversial. He always challenged what the religious norms were. So in light of all of this, I can see why people would think he was like John the Baptist. Others said, nope, he's not John, he's Elijah. He's Elijah. See, Elijah was one of the most famous prophets. Elijah was known for being used with power. Elijah was at the center of a lot of miracles. He prayed and it didn't rain for 3 years, and then he prayed again and it rained, and he prayed one time, and God sent fire from heaven. God used Elijah in a powerful, powerful way. It was really amazing to see, and so I can understand why people would see a similarity between Elijah and Jesus, because Jesus was filled with power, and Jesus himself was at the center of many, many miracles. So many miracles, in fact, that John wrote that if he were to do, or if people were to write down all of the miracles that he performed, that the world would not be big enough to contain all of the books. He was at the center of so many miracles. You think about it, 5,000 people he fed with a single lunch. He healed blind eyes and deaf ears. He made lame people walk. He raised people from the dead. He spoke, and the wind and the waves obeyed his voice. He was at the center of so many miracles. So I can understand why they would see Elijah at the description of what Jesus had done. But still, some were saying, nope, he's neither of those. He's not John. He's not Elijah. He's Jeremiah. He's Jeremiah. Obviously, Jeremiah was known as the weeping prophet. He was emotional. He was affectionate. He was passionate. Jesus himself was emotional. He was affectionate. He was passionate. Often it talked about him weeping. It said that he stood at the tomb of Lazarus and wept. It said he looked out over Jerusalem and wept. Hebrew said that he often prayed with loud cries and tears. That emotion, that passion was part of who Jesus was. And see, Jesus knew that these all sounded good, but he knew that this was not enough. This was not the right description of who he was. These were good men, but it's not good enough for Jesus to be a good man. That's not good enough for him to be a great man. He needs to be more than that. He is more than that. Now, I have to admit, they probably did not really think that Jesus was these people, because John the Baptist and Jesus were alive at the same time. So that would be weird to think that they were the same person. But they were probably just characteristics that they saw in similarities. We all do this. We all know. So we meet somebody and we think, oh, they remind me of so and so.
And so we all do that. There's a characteristic that we're drawn to, and we see that, and it makes us think of that. So that's probably what was happening here. They probably were noting some characteristics that people saw and thinking, you remind them of John, or you remind them of Jeremiah, you remind them of Elijah. And the problem is that when we allow ourselves to define Jesus with one or two characteristics, we misrepresent who he is. We misunderstand who he is. That may be a part of him, but that is not him. We are limiting him. This may be heartwarming. It may be challenging, but it's not life-changing. But Jesus, the great teacher he was, asked, but who do you think I am? What do you say? And so what he was doing was trying to drive this point home that it's not enough to be able to explain what other people say. You need to know for yourself. It's not enough for you to be able to list off these things. You need to know for yourself. I don't want you to tell me what they're saying. I want you to be able to differentiate between them and you. What do they think, but what do you know to be true? And then Peter stood as the spokesman. He said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. See, there's a knowledge of God that cannot come through intellect. There is a knowledge that cannot come through what we read, what we hear. This knowledge can only come through divine revelation, as Jesus puts it. It can only come if God reveals. It can only come when God reveals who Jesus is to you. There is a knowledge that is experiential. Once he reveals this to you, you can experience this and you know this, and this knowledge is life-changing. There is no way that you can see who Jesus is and be the same. And see, when you see him clearly, your list of characteristics of who he is gets summed up. As Peter said, you're the Christ. Your list of characteristics gets summed up. You're the anointed one. You're the Son of God. Because he is all things. He is so big that you can't list out who he is. You can't list out all of the characteristics to describe who he is, because he is all encompassing. He is huge. In moments of hurt, he is the comforter. In moments of despair, he is the God of all hope. In moments of loss and grief, he is the God who is near the brokenhearted. To the fearful, he is the strong tower. To the fatherless, he is the father. To the anxious, he is the God of peace. He is all. He is the Christ, the Son of the living God. He is all in all that you will need. And this knowledge comes through experience. This knowledge comes through revelation. This knowledge isn't taught. It's revealed by God himself. And so what can happen when we hear something like this morning is we can come to the question of, well, what do we do? Since it's that God has to reveal Jesus to us, do we just sit back in silence and wait? No, not at all. It is a truth that we can only truly see who Jesus is when God reveals him to us, but it is also a truth that if we pursue him, he will reveal himself to us. The half-brother of Jesus, James, wrote these words. He said, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. The writer of Hebrews said that we can come with confidence to the throne. And see, there's this, all throughout the Bible, there is this narrative of God calling people to pursue, calling people to come to him. He says, you come to me and I'll give to you. If you're hungry, you come to me and I'll give you to eat. If you're thirsty, you come to me and I'll drink. If you're tired, come to me and I will give you rest. There is a narrative throughout the Bible that makes it clear that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. We should pursue God. We should pursue knowledge. We should pursue the revelation of who Jesus is. And the truth is, he's already been revealed to us. That's why we're here. That is why we are all in this room, because Jesus has been revealed to humanity. John wrote in his gospel, he said that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then he goes on to say, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. The Son, Jesus, has been revealed. He has been revealed to us. And so what I'm calling pursuit, you may be calling response. He's revealed to you, and so now you're pursuing what he's revealed. And the more we pursue, the more he reveals. A few years ago, I was going through a workbook to deal with some issues in my life, and I have not had a tough life, so I can't say that I have a lot of issues. But in this particular time in my life, I found myself in a crisis of faith, and I was going through this workbook, and there was a part where it was talking about this exact thing, the intellectual view, except the book called it head view, and the heartfelt view of God. And so in this study, they're talking about the difference in these two views, and then at one spot it says, I want you to draw a picture of who God is in your heart. And I couldn't think of anything. I couldn't think of anything to draw, and I was like, I don't know how to draw this picture. And so eventually I ended up drawing the only thing that I saw in my mind. I ended up drawing the back of someone's head. And see, my dad was a pastor until he retired about 5 years ago, and growing up in church and being in a pastor's home, I had learned a list of characteristics of Jesus. I had learned a list of attributes of God, and I could tell you what some of those were, but in this moment, the only thing that I saw for myself was the back of someone's head. What I saw for myself was someone who was unapproachable and distant. And I began to realize that I saw all of those things as true. All of the characteristics I read about, I saw as true. All of the attributes I heard, I saw as true, but for you, not for me. And so I sat down and I decided, okay, I'm going to learn all of the attributes of God until I have the right image of who Jesus is. And see, I still was going about this an intellectual way, and I sat down and I started writing out the characteristics, the attributes, and I wrote down loving and gracious and kind and patient and faithful. And when I wrote faithful, I heard laughter, and so I thought someone had walked in my office, and I turned around and there was no one there, and so I thought, well, that's really weird. And so I sat down again and I started writing, and I began to have an argument with myself about whether God was faithful. And I was kind of shocked. And I began to question, okay, is he really faithful? And my answer inside was no, he's not. And I could list off situations and scenarios and circumstances that I had faced that I thought, nope, he's not faithful. And I thought to myself, no, I can't do this. I can't let that be the view that I have of God. And so I began right there. I said, okay, I'm going to take faithfulness as the first attribute of who he is. And I'm going to determine that I'm going to learn about this until I have a new image of who Jesus is. And so I started learning all of the verses. I started writing them down and studying what these verses were. And I took a verse a day and I studied as much as I could. And I took as much time as I could to try to find a new image of who Jesus really was. And finally on day 8, it was not first day or through day 7. It was all the same. Day 8, on day 8, I found myself in Matthew chapter 11, where Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you." And I stopped on that word yoke, and I started to look at that, and the yoke being the piece of equipment that holds two animals together so they can share the burden, so they can share the load. And in this moment, I found in front of my eyes an image of God standing next to me, carrying my burdens and walking beside me, hand in hand, helping with my burdens, with my cares, with my problems. And it was a brand new image, and it was as clear as day. And then a couple days later, I was reading in Psalm chapter 25 where it says that the Lord leads with unfailing love and faithfulness. And that word leads means to walk, to tread. Another definition means to bend low. And as I was reading that, I saw an image of me bending down to my children and talking with my kids like parents do. And when I did that, I saw God bending low to talk to me. And this was a clear image of who Jesus is, that he is there. And I say all of this to say that if you pursue, he will reveal. He has revealed, and he will continue to reveal. And today, some of us need a renewed image of who Jesus is. Maybe yours is like mine was, and it's an image built on things that other people have said to you. And you're basing your view of who Jesus is on what you've learned. Maybe today God has begun to erase that image and put a new image in its place. Maybe your image is from a bad snap judgment in one moment where God didn't do what he said or what you thought or what you imagined or what you prayed. And today, God is beginning to heal that hurt, and he's beginning to change your view. He's beginning to say, hey, you know what? That's not really who I am. That's just a skewed view of me. This is who I really am. And maybe some of us, we've been in here and we have seen the true reality of who Jesus is, and we have this relationship with him. But this morning, we are beginning to see a revitalized image of who Jesus is. The great thing about this is that it doesn't matter how long you've been in this. It does not matter how long you've known him. It does not matter how long it's been from the first time you saw this image of who Jesus is. It will continue to get better and better and more clear and more clear. Because there is so much more about him than we can know. And there's so much more about him that he wants to reveal to us. And so this is what I challenge you today. Lean into that. Lean into this. Take the time to sit and lean into what God is trying to do, what he is trying to unveil to you, what he's trying to reveal to you. Take time to lean in to this. And so as we leave here, we should determine that we are going to lean in, that we are going to pursue more revelation. We're going to pursue more intimacy. And so how do we pursue? How do we pursue? Through prayer. Take time to humble yourself and come into the presence of God and pray. Seek his face. Just lift up. There are verses all throughout the Bible that talk about this. In Hebrews, we just read the verse that said that we can come with confidence to the throne. Paul talks about it over and over, about praying, about making your requests made known to God. And Jesus himself modeled this need for prayer over and over. He would slip off and he would pray. But not only in prayer, but we should do this through reading the scriptures. If there is one surefire way to see who Jesus really is to read what the scriptures say about him. You start in the Gospels and you will see story after story of who he is. And as you read, you will begin to see a picture of who he is. God will begin to reveal who he is to you. But not just through prayer, not just through scripture reading, but through worship. Take time to come before the throne and lift up your heart, your affection, your passion. Tell God how great he is. Exalt his name because he is great and he is worthy of all of our praise. We need to determine that we are going to spend time pursuing him. John, the beloved disciple, said that we love because he first loved us. This is all a response to his pursuit. This is a response. Our pursuit is a response to him, to his revelation. But the more we respond, the more we pursue, the more he reveals. Can I pray? God, I thank you for who you are. God, I thank you that you love us. I thank you that you have revealed yourself to us. I thank you that you want a relationship. You want to reveal. You want more and more. And I pray that you would begin to paint a new picture in our minds of the Christ, the Son of the living God. God, we do love you. We thank you. In your name we pray. Amen.